A rabbi was walking home from the synagogue and saw one of her good friends, Rachel, walking right in front of her. And the rabbi started walking faster so she could catch up with her friend. But then she was surprised to see her friend, who she thought was a fairly observant Jew, go into a non-kosher Chinese restaurant. And so the rabbi sort of stood at the entrance and was watching, and she saw her friend placing her order, and then moments later, quick as can be, the waiter reappeared carrying what looked like a platter full of spare ribs, shrimp in lobster sauce, crab rangoon, and other trafe that the rabbi could not bear to think about. As her friend picked up the chopsticks and began to eat, the rabbi burst into the restaurant. "Rachel, what is it that you're doing? I saw you come into this restaurant. I witnessed you order this terrible trafe, and now you're eating it in violation of everything we are taught about the dietary laws and with obvious enjoyment." Rachel, wiping lobster sauce from her chin, replied, "Rabbi, did you see me enter this restaurant?" The rabbi nodded her head. "Did you see me order this meal?" The rabbi nodded again. "Did you see the waiter bring the food to me?" Rabbi nodded yes. "And did you see me eat it?" Once again, the rabbi nodded yes. "Then, Rabbi, I don't see the problem here. The entire meal took place under strict rabbinic supervision." You were generous, thank you for the laughter. Not the greatest joke ever, but what makes it amusing is our understanding that some things are simply binary. Food is either kosher or it's treif. It's fit for consumption from the perspective of Jewish tradition, or it isn't. Crab, hate to break it to you, is not kosher. There's imitation crab, that's different. But real crab, not kosher. Shrimp, not kosher. Lobster, also not kosher. Whether the rabbi supervises it or not, it's binary. And so much of Jewish law is about categories. Things are fit or they're unfit. They're kosher or they're treif. Sacred, kadosh, or chol, profane. For each holiday, for every Shabbat, there is a text that is read and other texts that are set aside for another time. And so as Jews, we have these categories really for everything, and in some ways, all people do. It's how we make sense of our world. And I was thinking about this because of a tragic category shift that happened this past week that you might have noticed. You might have read about Vivian Silver. She was thought to have been kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th from Kibbutz Be'eri. And her name is right here on our list of hostages that we've been praying for, Vivian Bat Shoshana, 74 years old. But this past Tuesday, we took her off the list of captives, but sadly not because she was freed or rescued, but because she was declared dead. Her remains were identified at Kibbutz Be'eri, where her body had been burned by Hamas terrorists. And so there was a category shift from missing to dead. And instead of praying for her safe return this Shabbat, we'll say Kaddish for her. Vivian Bat Shoshana, Vivian Silver, originally from Winnipeg, Canada. She was a peace activist, one of quite a few who were murdered on October 7th by Hamas. She was the longtime director of the Arab Jewish Center for Empowerment, Equality, and Cooperation, which organized projects joining communities in Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. She was also the mother of two sons, Yonatan and Chaim. Despite many, many setbacks, it's not easy to be a peace activist in the Middle East. But despite many setbacks, she never gave up on peace. Indeed, it was after a previous war between Israel and Gaza in 2014 that Vivian responded by founding an organization called Women Wage Peace, Nashim Osot Shalom, which promotes peace-building actions among women from all the communities in the area and from across the political and ethnic and religious spectrum. Thousands of people attended her funeral, including kibbutznik men in sandals, women in hijabs, tattooed and pierced youngsters, ultra-Orthodox men in white button-downs, and religious Zionist women in colorful head wraps. There was, reporters noted at the funeral, a man wearing a keffiyeh and a T-shirt that said, "Looking the occupation in the eye." And he was standing just a few feet away from a woman in an IDF uniform, a lieutenant colonel. And this tells you everything you need to know about Vivian, about the kind of person she was, about the things she cared about the people that she drew near to her. One of her friends said that Vivian was not some sort of naive, making peace in some lovey-dovey sort of way person. She said Vivian was grounded. She knew that there was simply no other option, that this is the only way she could live her life, the only way she could bear to live her life as an Israeli in Otef Gaza, the Gaza envelope, those communities right along the Gaza border, the communities that were decimated on October 7th. One of her friends named Ilan Amit, who worked with her on peace efforts, said, quote, "We are really hurting from her death, from her murder. But Arabs and Jews, we must more than ever continue her work." He gestured to the people who had come to honor her at her funeral. And he said, Vivian went through very tough times in her life, rounds of fighting with Gaza as a resident of the border area, violence between Arabs and Jews, periods of difficulty in the coexistence world. And she never stopped. She never stopped, and she never paused her work in these organizations. One of her volunteer duties was driving Gazans from the border to Israeli hospitals. In her own car, she'd go and she would take people so they could go and be treated at hospitals in Beersheba and Jerusalem. Now, Vivian resisted that tendency that I talked about at the beginning to see everything as binary: Arab, Israeli, Muslim, Jew, enemy, friend. She dedicated her life to trying to transcend these categories. And some might say that she failed, and that her death is proof of that. Proof that peace is impossible, that it's a waste of time, that it's naive and reckless. But her friends gathered to remember her, even in their anguish and their pain and their anger. Her friends don't see it that way. They don't see her life as a failure. One of those present is someone that I know, a journalist named Bradley Burston, who writes for Haaretz. And he was a longtime friend of Vivian Silver's, and he said this of her: "I've never met anyone who touched so many hearts so deeply. I've never met anyone who inspired so many people to work for peace, for equality, and for Arab-Jewish reconciliation and cooperation." These are his words. He said, in an era when the Israeli government has obstinately opposed peace, Vivian was everything the government is not: immensely capable, tirelessly proactive, and a force like no one else for peace, equality, and a shared future. And one of her fellow peace activists, named Gadar Hani, a Muslim Israeli Palestinian from a town called Hura, read a letter that she had written to Vivian Silver. And these are her words: "For 38 days, Vivian, we clung to the hope that you're over there in Gaza, not far from us. We knew you would survive the inferno. We knew you would tell us about how even in the dark tunnels, you continued to smile. You always used to say, Vivian, you cannot dispel evil with darkness. Evil is dispelled with more and more light." And these are another set of seemingly binary categories: darkness and light. But Interestingly, as much as our tradition likes binary categories, kosher versus treif, sacred versus profane, it recognizes as well the liminal, the in-between nature of certain things. It knows that not everything in the world can be put into neat binary categories. There are in-between times. There's those moments when darkness transforms to light. At dawn, as the sun comes up, bit by bit, little by little, the world comes into focus. And when it's finally light enough to distinguish the blue from the white strands in your tzitzit, then it's time to say Shema Yisrael. It's a continuum from darkness to light. In these liminal moments is the continuum. It doesn't have to be either or. You can be both and. You can be Zionist and in favor of a Palestinian state and Palestinian rights, the creation of a peaceful nation that could live in harmony alongside a Jewish democratic Israel. It might seem like a distant dream, but it's possible. It doesn't have to be binary. You can be fully convinced that the war Israel is currently fighting is just and necessary, and also deeply pained by civilian casualties in Gaza. It doesn't have to be binary. You can see the Jewish people as indigenous to the land of Israel, the opposite of colonizers, and you can also believe that the Palestinian people have a legitimate claim on the same land, and so we have to figure out some sort of compromise. You know, in times of pain and loss, when we're feeling attacked, and we are literally attacked, it's tempting to default to binary. And certain things, make no mistake, are binary. Terror is wrong, no matter the context. Intentionally targeting civilians and torturing them or raping them is a war crime, no matter how imperfect you might think a particular Israeli governmental policy in the West Bank might be. Some things are binary, but the wisdom comes from being able to distinguish not just darkness from light, but being able to distinguish between that which is truly binary in our world and that which is a continuum. And this was Vivian Silver's wisdom, and the world is much poorer without her in it. But while you can kill a person, you can't kill their wisdom or their legacy. Vivian's goodness, her moral clarity, and the seeds of peace she planted will, I pray and hope, someday, maybe decades from now, bear fruit. You cannot dispel evil with darkness, she always said. Evil is dispelled with more and more light.